If you would like to be turning your Bibles to 1 Samuel 17, that would just be great. 1 Samuel 17. Now we know that chapter, not that Samuel, but that chapter is all about David, young David. Sometimes we, in vacation Bible school, you would sing about only a little boy David. Only a little boy David, only a babbling brook. Only a little boy David and 5 smooth stones he took. And one little stone went into the sling went round and round, and then the giant came tumbling down. So how old was little boy David? If you look at that song, it sounds like he could have been maybe only 11 or 12 years old, but I think he was older than that. I've read or heard somewhere that you had to be 21 to be in the army with the Israeli army. Now, I don't remember reading that in the Bible, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. But he was young, and he probably felt, I think he felt small as he had to battle against Goliath. I feel like he did. And it may be that there are times in our lives when we may feel small. I know that when you look at the things that we deal with in our society right now and in our city right now, we probably feel like the efforts we make may seem rather small compared to all the problems that exist and the damage that was done. And it may be that in our life we may sometimes feel small, as though we're just really not accomplishing a whole lot. Probably accomplishing a lot more than you think you are. I would imagine so. But I imagine that we do deal with that from time to time. Probably all of us do. And then I would think another thing that David had to deal with is he was probably afraid. Now, he was not controlled by his fear, was he? But I would think that if you have a giant that's 9.5 feet tall and breathing out threatenings and slaughter like Goliath, that you would have to be just a little bit nervous about something along that line. And so I feel like that probably would be something also that he would experience, and no doubt we probably can identify with that. Have you ever been afraid of something in your life? Is there anything now you're afraid of? I think that all of us are certainly acquainted with fear. There's something that has made us afraid. It might be something as, I guess routine as sitting in a doctor's office and knowing that this may be a day that he's going to tell you that you may have to undergo a test and you really don't want to do it, and yet you feel like you may have to. Maybe there's something more significant. Maybe there's a fear of test results. You know, what's going to come back after they are running a biopsy. I don't even like the word biopsy, do you? Never have enjoyed that word, so I don't like it. It's just an examination of tissue, but it's still it's an uncomfortable word. Is that something that could make you afraid? There are many things in life that could frighten us. This morning it was brought out about the fear of death. You know, there's naturally there can be a fear of death. Brother Allen stressed that to us as he was presiding over the Lord's Supper this morning, and that is something that you can be afraid of. And, if you start dwelling on it very much, it can be frightening to us. Maybe different fears as far as financial things, fears concerning relationships. There's different things that could cause us to have fear. We realize that if we're talking about that, then also David had to deal with a giant, and so we have giants that we have to deal with. We understand that as well. In Revelation 21:8, talking about fear, we're told there that as far as the group that kind of heads the list, those who would be fearful or cowardly, those individuals are not going to be able to go to heaven. Instead, they have to go to the lake of fire. So I don't want to be one of those people, which means I don't want to be ruled by fear. I don't want to be like the one-talent man who was afraid. I don't want to be like the spies who said we can't conquer the land of Canaan. But instead, I want to be one who has courage. As far as something that may have made you afraid in life, there are some things even regarding the Lord's work that may be a little frightening to some people, but once you do them, you feel a lot better about it. I remember the first time I ever tried to lead a song. I remember the first time I ever tried to present a lesson of any kind. I ever tried to teach a Bible class, and all those things were a little bit frightening, and many of you have had experiences along that line. And we all do face challenges, just like David did. We also realize that David, the psalmist, later would write words in Psalm 27:1, "The Lord is the strength of my life, and of whom shall I be afraid?" Well, let's go to the text, though. Let's see what David did on that incredible day as he defeated Goliath. In 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 2, we'll read 2 through 11, and there will be some lengthy readings as you look at 1 Samuel 17. We won't do the whole chapter. but we'll read a few verses here, so if you'll bear with me and follow along with me. You got Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, and they drew up in battle array against the Philistines. And so the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley in between them. So I've got that picture in my mind, don't you? Then there was a champion who went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath, and he was from Gath. And his height was 6 cubits and a span, which would interpret, or for us would be interpreted to be about 9.5 feet tall. So he was a tall, tall fellow. And he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail. And the weight of that coat was about 5,000 shekels of bronze, and there are different views on how much that could be, anywhere from 150 to 200 pounds or so. So a lot of people he might have to battle against would weigh less than just the jacket he's wearing, the habergeon that he was wearing. So that's incredible. He had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. The staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. Not many of us probably know much about weaver's beams today. We don't do a lot of delving into understanding what that might be, but I have read that as far as the spear was concerned, not the spear, but the iron spearhead, that it weighed 600 shekels, and again, we don't know much about what that would be, other than it's been interpreted to be about maybe 15 to 18 pounds of weight. And so that's a lot of weight right there when you think about it. And I'm sure he could throw that thing like a good football player could throw a football, probably. So this character, that he stood and he cried out to the armies of Israel and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you're the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. And, if he's able to fight with me and kill me, we'll be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, you'll be our servants and serve us. And then he says, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. He didn't leave a whole lot to the imagination, did he? I mean, he just kind of told you. He wasn't one of those fellows you'd say, now what are you trying to say anyway, Goliath? You knew exactly what he was trying to say. And don't you suppose he had a big booming voice? You could hear him, and that valley and everything, you probably could it would just resonate, the sound would. And so, and this character would do this, he would just do this daily. And so Saul and all of Israel heard the words of the Philistine, and they were just scared. They were just really afraid with something like that. Intimidated, really intimidated. Just like probably all of us at one time or another have felt like something may have intimidated us. Well, let's skip around a little bit in this, if you will, with me. Verse 16, the Philistine drew near. He presented himself 40 days. Every morning, every evening, you had to listen to that bird. You had to listen to what he had to say. I don't know if he changed his speech up any or not, but every morning, it may have been the thing he woke the people up with. Just like a rooster crowing, you had Goliath crowing in the morning. Then in the evening, maybe he varied his time, I don't know, but maybe it was right around sunset every evening. Here he'd go, maybe right around when they were ready to eat their meals in the evening. There they'd hear this joker again, and here he is barking out these words, these threatening words. And it's just a problem. It's a serious problem, and it represents much more than this big soldier threatening a group of Israelites. It just represents the fact that they are afraid, and they shouldn't be afraid of this person or even the entire Philistine army. Enter David. Verse 20, he gets up early in the morning. He left the sheep with a keeper because he was dutiful about his work as a shepherd, wasn't he? He didn't just run off and leave them. So David's a good man. Made some mistakes, but he did some good things. He took the things and went as Jesse commanded him. He came to the camp as the army was going out to the fight and shouting for the battle, because Israel and the Philistines had finally drawn up in battle array, army against army. And so then you've got David leaving his supplies in the hand of the supply keeper, ran to the army, greeted his brothers, talked with them, and here was Goliath coming out again and giving out that speech of his. In verse 26, skip down to that, David spoke, and he said, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? Because who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Can't imagine something like that being allowed. And then 32 through 37, David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. I can handle it." Saul said to David, "You're not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him. You're just a youth." Only a little boy David, that's who you are. They'll sing vacation Bible school songs about you one day. And he was a man, he's a man of war from his youth. You know, you're just a youth, and that's all this guy's ever done all his life. He's fought people all of his life. He's a champion. See, this is not just a big man. You know, as Elvis used to sing, you're just tall, that's all. No, that's not him. This is a big, strong, monstrous, fighting man. That's what he did. He fought and he killed men. That was his job. And he'd been doing that because you imagine what a strapping fella he was growing up. I mean, by the time he was probably 11 or 12 years old, he's already over 6.5 feet tall. Then he starts growing, gets his growth spurt going. And so there's no telling how long this man's been murdering other people. So that's who we're dealing with. You're a youth. He's been killing people from his youth. And then David said, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep, and I'm not just a weak person. I want you to know this. And there was a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock. I went out and struck it. And I delivered the lamb from its mouth. When it arose against me, I caught the thing by its beard and struck and killed it. And your servant has killed lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be just like one of them, because he's defied the armies of the living God." That's some pretty good talk. The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, he'll deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." And then you have, of course, the climactic part of this story. Verse 40, he took his staff in his hand, chose for himself 5 smooth stones, put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and his sling was in his hand, drew near to the Philistine. Philistine came and began drawing near to David. And the men who bore the shield went before him, and the Philistine looked around and saw him, because he was just a youth, ruddy and nice looking. And the Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And he cursed David by his gods. And then the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I'll give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field." Whew, that's scary to me. That's big talk, isn't it? And he wasn't just a talker. I think he probably had told many other people that throughout the years, and later on probably had his foot on their dead bodies after he had made that claim. So he wasn't just a talker. He was a fighter. He was a killer. And so that's what he planned to do. David looks at the Philistine. He probably looks up at him, doesn't just keeps on looking up at it, and said, "You come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin. I'm coming to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you've defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand. I'll strike you. I'll take your head from you. Give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth. And all the earth will know there's a God in Israel." And so we know what happens, don't we? David put his hand in the bag, took out the stone, slung it, smote the Philistine in the forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. And that, of course, tells us about the story of the powerful victory of David defeating Goliath. So here was David, seemingly without a chance. Here was Goliath. Here was a giant with weapons. Here was a giant with huge armor. Here was a giant about 9.5 feet tall. Here was a giant who had given out challenges 40 days and 40 nights. And David was concerned about at least 2 different things. One, how can it be that a man like this outside of God's covenant was giving challenges without somebody shutting his mouth? Secondly, how could people inside God's covenant stand by so idly and allow this to go on? What in the world is happening? So David did what he had to do. He did not think as much about who he was as he thought about whose he was. In Isaiah 12 verse 2, "Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid." And when you realize God is your salvation, you realize that you're not small, you're not insignificant, you're very important. You do play an important role as you stand up to giants throughout life. 2 Timothy 2:21, "We should be sanctified and useful for the master, prepared for every good work." And David was a useful tool for God, and I want to be a useful tool for God, and so do you. I know that you do, and you are. And maybe we can look at some things to kind of sharpen the tools this evening as we're striving to do that very thing. What did David do? First of all, he went to where the battle was. He had to go to the battlefield. He couldn't really stay out there where he was shepherding the flocks, could he? Because that's not where the battle was. He couldn't go out and fight the Amalekites or the Ammonites or the Girgasites or anybody else. He had to go fight Philistines. And he didn't just pick on any Philistine that happened to come around. He could have found somebody smaller than him of the Philistines and maybe taken that person on. But no, he had to go to the battlefield and search out Goliath. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But he had to go to where the battlefield actually was. And we have to do the same thing. And there can be battlefields in a lot of places today. Some people have battlefields in their home as far as the spiritual battlefield is concerned. You might have a spouse who's not a Christian, and every day you have to live the Christian life in front of that person. And so that's a challenge. 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 6, the incredible challenge that is given toward women who live at home with their husbands who aren't Christians. And of course the same thing would apply when a man is a Christian living at home and his wife is not. The battlefield may be at school, where you're going to school, young people. And so you have to every day stand up firmly and let people know that you're a Christian and that you've given your life to Jesus. And so you're not going to walk in the way of the world. Battlefield may be where you work. Battlefield may be in relationships of other types, as you are out in the world and yet not of the world. In the world but not of the world. So he knew where the battlefield was. He didn't sit back. He went out to where it was and he engaged in the fight. Also, David fought the right giant. Now, like I say, he didn't just go select a soldier and fight him, but he went to the man who was the real serious problem, Goliath. And so we have to fight the right giant. I believe a lot of people spend time fighting the wrong giants. Do you know that right now there are some people who want to debate members of the Lord's church who are part of the disaster relief program that has so blessed our lives, that has given us $314,000 in our congregation to use to disperse goods to different people, that there are some people who believe that they don't have the right to be doing that kind of thing? And I'm sure they are writing up arguments, and I'm sure they are thinking in terms of how they would like to approach members of the Lord's church for the disaster relief. And you know what those folks, those kind people at disaster relief have done? After receiving a threatening letter saying, we want to debate you, they said, we appreciate your concern for the Lord's work. We have the same concern. We feel that what you have is an opinion, and therefore we just don't have time to be involved in debating right now. We've got too much work to do. Just like Nehemiah, when Sanballat and Tobiah tried to engage him in a fight. But can you imagine all that energy that's being used to try to debate a good cause? They're trying to fight the wrong giant. Why are they doing that? Simon Peter could tell you about that. Simon Peter on one occasion was up on his housetop when it was time for him to eat, and so he falls into a trance, and then he sees this sheep that is knit there, and it has all these animals in it, and as he sees that, he's been told to rise and kill and eat, and he says, not so, Lord. I've never eaten anything unclean in all my life. And then he's told, what God has cleansed, don't you be calling common or unclean, okay? What's wrong? Peter was so concerned about making sure that as I preach the gospel, I want to preach it to the right people. In other words, Jews. I don't want anybody else to have it. I want to make sure that it just goes mainly to Jewish people, which I was glad to do on Pentecost, but it's not for Gentiles. Not as far as I'm concerned, says Simon Peter. He was fighting the wrong giant. So concerned that the wrong people might hear the gospel and be saved. And God has to straighten him out and get him on the right course. And so I want to fight the right giant and also be in tune with the battle lines that God has drawn up for me. Make sure that I'm aware of those things. And so that's what David did. He went to where the battle was. Secondly, he gave credit where credit was due. Now David let Saul know that I'm a little bit experienced with some hostile situations. Now let's look at his resume. He says that I was able to deliver the sheep from a lion or a bear. And the lambs, I was able to deliver them from lions and bears. Now, That sounds impressive to me. But if you were to interview David before this battle and say, David, apparently you're the man who you probably have the skills to be able to defeat Goliath on the battlefield, he would say, I absolutely do not have. I don't have it. I may have killed a lion or a bear, but neither one of them possessed all the equipment that Goliath has got. And yes, he's got the ability to absolutely annihilate me. There's no doubt about it. I am not confident as far as my own power is concerned. He knew where his strength came from. And he wanted the Israelite army to know it as well. 1 Samuel 17, 45 and 46, he says, I'm coming to you, as he talks to the Philistine, in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. So the Lord will deliver you into my hand. There's where the power source is, not my power. He was one who would believe what Paul said in Philippians 4:13, absolutely. I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. And so I want to be aware of the fact that whenever giants are conquered in my life, whatever they might be, that instead of saying, I did a pretty good job with that, I conquered that giant myself, I instead will say, thank our good Lord, our wonderful God that we serve, that was a giant that was able to be conquered. We give praise to God. How about times whenever you fail to conquer a giant and you leave God out of it, and that's probably why you failed to conquer the giant? That can happen, right? If David goes toe-to-toe with Goliath and he does not realize where his power source is, what do you think will happen? I think probably about the same thing that would have happened if Joshua would have ignored totally what God said about conquering Jericho, don't you think? It would have been a dismal failure. And so you need to realize where the power source is. But as you look at the Bible, you can see different times where people did not give God credit and they got in trouble. Just after the wonderful victory over Jericho, you remember the next chapter, don't you? The men of Israel go up to try to conquer Ai. I mean, there's nothing compared to conquering Jericho. Nothing to it. And they go up against that army and they come right back again because they have been totally humiliated, completely destroyed on the battlefield, and many lives are lost. And I believe because they were so cocky and overconfident that they left God out of their plans. David knew where credit was due. Thirdly, he understood his role. Now, he knew he had some power as far as taking a sling and hurling that thing and throwing that rock rapidly and smacking that giant in the right spot there on his forehead. He didn't have too many places to aim at, did he? Because the guy's covered from head to toe with armor. So you're going to have to hit him in the right spot or else you're in trouble. So he knew he had some skills, but he also knew that his role was not a hired slinger. His role was a humble servant, serving God. He would be the kind of guy who would embrace Micah chapter 6, verse 8. What doth the Lord require of thee? But to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with thy God. That's how David would have styled himself, as a humble servant. Same thing with us. Whenever, and there's so many of you who have led people to Christ over the years, and I'm so proud of you. And this isn't an easy area for that to be done. I realize that. But many of you have done that. But as you have done that, I'm willing to say that none of you ever have said, I did that. I'm the one that did that on my own. You would never do that. What you would see yourself as being would be a teacher that God could use to be able to accomplish good things. And you are. And you're a servant of God's by doing that. And may us all, the good Lord help us all to realize that and continually be humble servants. And I'm going to tell you a thing you're not looking for in this particular lesson, but it's true. And that is the fourth point and the final point. And that is, you've got to be prepared to miss. That's right. That's why he took 5 stones, right? 5 smooth stones. He just needed one. He was 5 times more prepared than what he needed to be, right? What are you going to do if you miss with that first stone? Did God guarantee him you will win this victory with 1 stone? I don't remember reading that, do you? So he took 5 stones. Now what does that tell me as a Christian? I've got to keep fighting, and if I lose a battle, that doesn't mean the Lord doesn't love me anymore. That doesn't mean, it just means that I got to try again. I may have failed. I may have made a mistake somewhere along the line, or maybe it just wasn't the right time for this giant to fall. We'll just try again. We'll just keep on working at it. If David was 100% sure he'd hit his target, why more stones? He knew that there could be a failure, could be a setback. But he also knew that failure was but a step toward success. In 2 Samuel 10, verse 11, you got an interesting battle taking place where you got Joab. And Joab was a good warrior. He was a good, powerful man. And war was his thing. It was really his thing. And so he was such a powerful soldier that he was going to obey his king at all costs. And he ended up in a treacherous act that he never would have wanted to have done. But he literally had to pull back some of his forces to allow Uriah the Hittite to be killed. And yet he did that because king said do it. And you've got to be obedient to your king. Well, he was engaged in another battle now, 2 Samuel 10, verse 11. And so he's in charge of half of the Israeli army. And they were battling two different forces, the Syrians and the Ammonites, two of the most deadly enemies the Israelites ever had. And being a good leader runs in the family a lot of times. And so his brother, and his brother's name was Abishai, was also a great leader. You don't hear as much about him as you do Joab. Joab is a little more popular, but his brother was equally strong. He was in command of the other half. And here's what Joab said in 2 Samuel 10, verse 11. He said, if those Syrians are too strong for me, then you help me. If the people of Ammon are too strong for you, I'll help you. Why didn't he just say, the Lord's already told us we're going to win this thing, so there's no need of even preparing much for this. He knew that there was a chance that something might not go exactly the way he would like for it to, but it still means the Lord's ruling up there. Hurricanes are not something that goes along with what we would think the Lord would want to happen either. But it doesn't mean he's not up there and that he doesn't love us, because he does love us, and we realize that. Now, what a difference it would have made in Peter's life when he was walking on water if he would have realized that too. Maybe he should have stopped and thought, let's see, what am I going to do if the wind gets really loud? I don't like strong winds. They bother me. What if those waves get boisterous? What will I do then? What will I do if I do begin to sink? You know, Jesus just said, come to me, and he didn't guarantee me that I wouldn't start to sink a little bit. What do I do then? You know, maybe he should have been prepared along that line. And the lesson behind all that for us is we don't want to let a single setback ever to cause us to give up on the goal, and especially when we think about our long-term goal of getting from here to heaven, and realizing also that though my goals and God's goals were in harmony, maybe our timing was a little bit different. And so I've got to realize and appreciate that as well. David, powerful soldier, a man who was later given a compliment in Acts 13, verse 22, that's one of the finest you've ever heard. A man after God's own heart. And I want to be that way too. I want to be able to conquer giants, because I want to be able to go to the same place that I believe David is going to, the beautiful place called heaven. And I know you feel the same way. This evening, though, as you're thinking in terms of that and making your journey, if you've not obeyed the gospel, we'd love to see you do that tonight. Put Christ on in baptism after believing in him with all your heart. If you need to respond to our Lord's invitation in any way, we want you to know that the Lord's invitation is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And it's not just something that has to be done at a time like this that's real convenient, but any time that you want to talk about obeying the gospel, we're ready to listen to you, and our Jesus is always ready to save you. You need to respond to our Lord's invitation. We do invite you to come to him now as we stand and sing together.